I am a firm believer that if there is one word that will stand out above all other words when we describe our country's amazing journey of modernization over the last few decades, it is education. Our institutions, our leaders of today, all of us, including me, are the proud products of the Bhutanese education system. His Majesty the King. Kuzuzan Bola. Welcome to your UN House and to Bhutan Dialogues. Our topic today is early schoolhood education. Children and young people are the future of this and every other society in the world. More than 90% of the child's brain develops before the age of 5. Today we have 340 ECCD centres with a total enrolment of 8,500 children. To ensure leaving no one behind, we at the UN look at providing equal education services and opportunities across the country. One such UN initiative is the ECCD Centre in Lungo, a remote village in Laya, which was inaugurated in April this year by the UNICEF representative Rudolph. With the setting up of this ECCD, children of Lungo have equal access to the same services and opportunities as children living in Thimphu. As an enabler and facilitator for testing smarter and innovative programs, the UN emphasises programs that are innovative with high investment returns. Studies on the preschool program find drastic differences in life outcomes for children who participated in the ECCD program. The rate of return was calculated at US $16 for every one you invest. So you get, for every dollar we put into ECCD, we have done research that proves we're getting a return on investment of $16. Investing in human beings is truly the best form of long-term capital investment. Our speaker today is Deki Choden. Welcome to UN House. Deki is the founding principal and proprietor of the Early Learning Centre. The Early Learning Centre is a top 10 school in Bhutan. She has received a Bachelor's of Art from Columbia University in New York and a Master's of Arts from Reading University in the UK. She was the first woman lecturer at Sherubtse College. She has been in the forefront of introducing innovative practices in education, some of which include design for change, saying no to packaged foods in schools, saying no to hurtful name calling. Our host, Karma, said to me earlier on that we need to reduce the amount of time we spend introducing him. So I'm going to just focus on the fact that this man, the other day I was in the cafeteria here at the UN and I was speaking to some of my friends and I was asking them, how would you describe Karma? And their answer was, well, he's very handsome.
Thank you.
He's an innovator. He is a Buddhist scholar. And through the work he's doing with Loden Foundation, he leads entrepreneurship here in this country. I have a special ask for you. I want you to help us. I want you to help Karma and I do some what is called crowdsourcing. At this point in time, 993 people have viewed the YouTubes of Bhutan Dialogues, and 170 people have listened to the podcasts. But we want to raise the number of people who are availing of this experience through YouTube and podcasts. So we are looking for your ideas. Now, when I was thinking about this and speaking to my colleagues, they said, but Jerry, is there any incentive? And I said, okay, what's your suggestion? And their suggestion was that we should invite Kinley Wongdi. Kinley, can you stand up? And Kinley is today providing juice for everybody to help us come with ideas around crowdsourcing ideas, how we can raise the use of this Bhutan Dialogues through YouTube and through podcasts. So I want to thank you, Kinley, for helping us as a young entrepreneur, but also in helping bringing juice to Bhutan Dialogues. Thank you, Shejun. I'm coming close to the end. I think it's 5 points. The first one is, this is also a really important networking opportunity for young people. And when I say that, I mean there's an opportunity for young people who are looking for interning opportunities, but those of you who are in senior positions, please also have conversations with those that are here today and ask them if they could be helping you with an interning opportunity. That's the first point. The second point is, we have a colleague called Tarshan. Tarshan, can you stand up? And Tarshan will be running a free workshop on the 19th of July dealing with environmental resilience. 19th July, dealing with environmental resilience. For those of you who are interested in attending that workshop, please speak to Tarshan directly during the cup of tea and cup of coffee and the juice. Number 3, after the tea, we have the add-on session of Bhutan Dialogues. And today we are very fortunate to have the Chief Executive Officer of Thimphu Tech Park, Sering Sigye Dorji. Sering, could you stand up? This truly is a very fortunate colleague that we have today. There will be so many things you will be able to learn in terms of dealing and accessing technology, especially iPhones. So I would suggest to everybody in this room who has an iPhone or any type of technology, you will be able to learn stuff in the 20 minutes that Sering will be talking to us that will really be a very useful add-on session today. Sering, thank you very much. Second last, I would be grateful if you could take out your iPhone and put it on silent. Ideally switch it off, but if you feel you can't really switch it off, at least put it on silent, because we're doing a recording for the YouTubes and podcasts. So even a phone call into the room will upset the recording. Last point, before I hand over to Dr. Carmen. Since the 11th of July is a government holiday, which would normally be the next time we do Bhutan Dialogues, we will have the July session of Bhutan Dialogues on Wednesday, the 10th of July, at the usual starting time of 4 p.m. Kadenshela.
So, Kuzambo, Madam, and thank you for joining us in Bhutan Dialogues. We see this as an educational forum, a space where we ask questions out of curiosity, we conduct civil conversations on our own situation with regard to development and human progress. I often say, in a Buddhist terminology, this is a space where we want to practice mindful listening and right speech. And you, as an expert in education, educationist who is right at the forefront of educational change and innovation in the country, it's a great honor for us to have you. Our ritual is really to ask our guest to tell us a little bit about yourself. So can you tell us how you came to be who you are right now? If you have any interesting life experience or anecdotes that relate to your career, your project right now.
Thank you. Thank you to Loden Foundation and to everyone here at the UN House for having me here on Bhutan Dialogues. And also I would like to thank everyone for your presence. So I guess we'll start at the beginning.
Yes.
I was born in Pemagotsil at a time when there were no roads, when there was no electricity, not even indoor plumbing to speak of, and certainly no schools. And if there were, then they were very few and far between. And so me and many of my generation, we went to schools, boarding schools in India. Quite a few of us were attending Jesuit schools and Catholic schools, really. And I spent a fair bit of my formative years under the loving care of the nuns. And I have to say that those were the years that I was able to forge some very deep friendships, and which have lasted a lifetime, in fact. And all of this I actually owe to my parents, because at that point in time, I don't think many people saw the value of education. And being tucked away in the remote corners of a very remote part of the country at the time, getting to places was not easy. Forget about having your own car. There wasn't even public transportation to speak of. So if you ever wanted to leave your village and come to Thimphu or Phuntsho or even Samdrujonkar, you had to walk for about 8 hours and then wait indefinitely for a lone truck that might just come your way. And if they were not loaded, then they would take you. If not, then you just waited for another one. God knows when that would come. So that was the kind of growing up I had. And then I would go to the Catholic school, and it was a whole different world, because the nuns were very prim and proper, and they would teach us. Our shoes would be polished, our hair would be in pigtails, and we would be prim and proper just like them. And so it was such a dichotomy. So for 9 months we would live that way, and then for the remainder of the 3 months I would come home and I would be carrying water in bamboo poles, would you believe it? Because at that time there weren't even the plastic jerry cans. And I think even though the water would spill on your back and you would get all wet, in retrospect I think I miss those bamboo poles, because today we're just overwrought with plastic all over. But that was a time, a very, very pristine time that I grew up in.
Some of my friends who have also been through Christian missionary schools like yourself, they retrospectively now look at that time as a period when they were totally disconnected from their roots, and they actually put some part of the blame on not having the cultural, psychological stability now on such educational upbringing. What is your take? Do you have a similar cultural sort of sense of instability, or could it have been better?
I think it all boils down to perspective, really, because for me, I think I valued the education, and that was hard to come by at that time. So I think so many of the good values that they instilled in us, I think made up for that. And now, 32 years being a teacher, where I have to be so mindful of the kind of culture that our children are learning, I think that, you learn with the children. And I think it's an exciting way to be able to discover your own culture and tradition, even as you teach your children, So I don't think so. I have very fond memories of my school years.
That's great. And then you have moved on to do your undergraduate in Columbia.
Yes.
And master's, is it?
Yes.
In Reading?
No, actually. Master's in Reading.
You become the first female lecturer at Sherubtse, as Jerry pointed out earlier. What brought you to where you are right now, leading a school, being an educationist?
Yes.
Why did you become one?
I actually majored in political economy, and maybe that was because I really didn't know what else to take. I didn't really have too much of self-direction at that point. I was discovering myself, and I was enjoying college life as well. But one has to major, and at the end of my sophomore year, when you had to declare your major, political economy sounded like a good bet. And that's only because economics would be a little bit more lucrative, and I was advised, but I couldn't handle the microeconomics and the econometrics and all of that, so I settled for political economy. But interestingly, I figured when I came back I would join the Planning Commission, which I did actually. But before that, very interesting that the government at the time felt, and there were only 77 graduates at that time, as compared to 2,000, over 2,000 today. So 77 of us, and then the government felt, oh, these people have been all over the place and they don't know their culture. And so I think the best way is to pack them off to the most remote parts of the country and let them teach for a whole year. And that's what I did. And it was the year 1986. And so I was packed off to Bamagatsal, which I was most happy to go because that's where my family lived. And so for all of 9 months, I was a full-time teacher, and I would say full-time and then some. Because in the remote schools at the time, first of all, there was such an acute shortage of teachers, and I guess it was actually maybe a part of the government's ploy to see if somebody might actually end up taking up teaching. So I went to Bamagatsal, and it was the most exhilarating experience, I must say. I wasn't trained, I didn't plan ever to be a teacher, but I think I just it was like, I was in my element, really, because teaching came naturally to me, and I was very, very motivated and driven, and I had nothing else to do, so teaching was just a joy. And so every time a teacher would be on leave, or so being at the bottom of the totem pole, you are the most dispensable or whatever, so ask Miss Deki to substitute, ask Miss Deki for this. And of course, if I was free, I would gladly do it. And in fact, I would like to narrate one incident, which I suppose would be kind of critical in explaining to you why I came to be where I am. So it was a boarding school, and there were girls and boys. There were not so much, so many facilities for the boarders, but they did have a huge football ground and a basketball court filled with potholes. And I noticed that on the weekends, the girls would just be cleaning their dorms, doing their laundry, combing their hair, and twiddling their thumbs, basically. There was really nothing to occupy them. Whereas the boys were running helter-skelter on the football court, everywhere. And so I felt, maybe the girls needed to do something. And the excuse was that there were no balls, and also because, in Bamagatsal, there weren't even any shops. So to get a basketball was quite a rare commodity. But one day I chanced upon about 3 or 4 basketballs in the storeroom when I went to get some books or something. And I asked the headmaster, oh my God, we do have some extra balls. And then the headmaster, which was very interesting, he said, oh no, you can't have them because they'll roll down the hill. And then you'll never get it. It'll take all of 3 hours for the boys to get it on a Sunday afternoon. I said, better that than to have them locked up. And I was never quite athletic or anything like that in school, but suddenly it's like, I just felt like I knew how to play sports, and I found that I was quite good at it, and the girls were very, very excited about it. And so all of these things were like really great memories, but then come December, I had to come back to Thimphu.
You introduced basketball or
yes,
football?
Yes, I did. No, there was basketball, sorry. And the interesting part of the story is that because the headmaster had warned me about the ball rolling down the hill, and then the boys were very interested to watch the girls play. So I said, you're not going to watch for free. You're going to have to create like a human fence on that slope. And so they were just as active, to retrieve the ball as the girls were. And that was quite interesting. So then I had to come back and then did my civil service exams, and then of course, joined the planning commission. But I was barely there for 3 months, and my mind, everything was back in Pemakatsel, thinking about the kids, and I think that's when I knew that that was what I could do with my life. And so I was in the director's chamber, and he was very shocked, and he said, wow, nobody at that time really opted for teaching. And so I said, but I wanted to, and so he gladly let me go on transfer. And so after that I was teaching in Kamlung Primary School, then of course a year stint at Sherubtse College, then at YHS, Chamgangkha. So I think all in all, before I actually started my own school, I had actually worked in the public school system as well as the private, and also at the rural and urban. And so I felt that once I came to Thimphu and then I started raising my family, and then I saw that my young children didn't have a place to go, babysitters were hard to come by, and I was a full-time teacher. And then I also saw that many other women were also looking for placement of their very young children in schools. And so that's when I got the idea to also start a preschool program. And then just 4 years ago, I upgraded it to a high school. So now actually I've founded and I'm heading the ELC High School currently. So that's how I got to be where I am.
Wonderful story. So you started ELC as a social need, to
yes,
to fill in a social gap. Tell us a little bit more about what happens at ELC that's different from other schools or from the public schools in particular.
Yes. I have to admit that for a good part of my 32 years, I was just operating like any teacher would, and that is, from a space of wanting to meet standards, wanting to do right by your parents and the children. And so it was always about just following dictates and mandates, basically. What's the new curriculum? What's the new pedagogy? Go and attend that training. Go do this, go do that. So I was a follower, you would say, in order to be able to run my school. But I have to say the turning point came for me in 2008, actually, when so many things were happening. As you well know, we had, democracy had come in, and we had, 100 years of monarchy, and also the coronation of a king, unprecedented. All of these things were happening, and I was also put in touch with some wonderful educators from outside the country, because there was a real need to see how we could overhaul our education system to make it better. So all of this was having quite a lot of influence on me. And then in 2010, as you well know, everybody was talking about GNH, and intellectual circles all around the world were deliberating on GNH. But the schools in Bhutan didn't even know what GNH stood for, I have to tell you. And so that's when the Ministry of Education also felt now is the time to roll it out to the grassroots level. And so in 2010, we were all mandated to educate for gross national happiness. And so I attended a 6-day workshop along with 546 other school principals in 3 shifts, and I signed up for the very first batch. And it was quite a lot to take. What is GNH? It's an abstract noun, it's an abstract concept, and we really didn't know much about it. But I think, the understanding that a young king could come up with a vision so profound as that, I think that kind of got me, And I said, wow, if this is going to trickle through us, then I better understand it. And I think that's when my own learning journey as to what the bigger purpose of education meant, and meant for Bhutan in particular, I think that's when I sort of had a turning point to see that if a vision like happiness could be the goal, then if your intentions were true and you really wanted to aspire to such a wonderful vision, then you did not have to ask permission to do the right thing, to be able to get there. And so then followed a string of, meetings with all kinds of people who were just crossing my path, actually. And one particular person was Kiran Biruseti, and she was a designer by profession who had just started her school in 2001 in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad. And this school was already making waves because she was not, I think, contaminated by being an educator, where you have like set fixed ideas of what pedagogy and all of that. She was a design thinking person. She was a designer by profession. But her story was very interesting because she had a 5-year-old son who was really excited about going to school. But slowly she found him choreographing his way into this very unmotivated child. Somebody who was so bright-eyed and wanted to go to school suddenly was so listless. And then it became her story. She said, I cannot see my son going through 15 years of his life like this. And then she went into education. And of course, long story short, she founded Design for Change. And in 2010, interestingly enough, she comes to ELC with her 8th grade students, and she asks me, because I had met her in 2008, while she was sharing about her learning journey and, the transformation of education in India through her little school. So when I met her in 2010, she actually asked me, would the Early Learning Center be the country partner for Design for Change? Because, we've taken it to about 30,000 schools in India alone, and we're taking it outside of India. And would ELC, and that was quite a tall order, because I had no idea. I'm trying to grapple with GNH here. What is Design for Change? But then it was not she who explained it, it was her students. And these 8th grade students just stood up in our library and started talking with so much passion and conviction and confidence. And our children are like, they're so scared to speak up. So to see these young children speak with so much exuberance and so much understanding about their community and everything, I said, I don't know what it will take, but I'm sold. And I think that's when we took on the mantle of Design for Change.
Yes. I mean, there were quite a lot of explorative work being done through Royal Education Council and GNH in Education, several agents trying to maybe not bring a total overhaul of the education system, but at least modify and adapt for the better. You opted to go with Design for Change.
Yes.
You saw the students of Kiran Seti's school form here. What is in Design for Change that you think is powerful and more effective than what other systems have adopted?
I found that it was, that was the answer to how to get to GNH actually. You were given the goal and the vision, and suddenly I was served on a silver platter the means to get there. And how was it the means is that Design for Change is a design thinking model of, it's a 4-step template of feel, so it begins with the heart, imagine, your head, do, which is your hands, and then share, because nothing is of value unless it is shared. So, and she was so good at coining these wonderful catchphrases, and so she called it the FIDS for kids, FIDS, feel, imagine, do, share, FIDS for kids. And basically what this allows is that children learn through Design for Change, problem solving, critical thinking, creative thinking. These were things that we were told that we must do in the 21st century, but nobody taught us how. So suddenly here was a template that we could actually start drawing out from the children all of these faculties, and we wouldn't even know the names of it. That the kids were being creative, but we wouldn't be able to say that it's creative skills. But I think what the Fits for Kids does is for every child in Bhutan, also if we can give them this tool, which I'm trying through the Design for Change network, and I would like to say at this point that we have till date 237 schools across the country who have signed up for Design for Change. And we started in 2010 and now 237. And you know who my coordinator is? Because as you well know, Design for Change now has taken root in some 65 countries around the world. They have their annual conferences and everything. And if you have the means, you will attend these conferences. But I'm a full-time principal of a school, running a school, and on the side I try to do this. So I don't have the means, but at least, at the very least, if you can take this idea to the schools, and if they can be empowered to brainstorm and imagine their own solutions to their problems and feel empowered, then my goodness, I think that's the reward in itself. So that is Waila. Because it teaches you life skills. It teaches you, it starts with a heart, it doesn't start with a head. That's the interesting thing. Because I think the head will know what the heart feels. So when a child, for instance, feels bullied in school and has the safe space through this Design for Change model to be able to say, I'm feeling bullied. This is the problem that I'm not happy with. The next step is to imagine. And they're doing it collectively. So putting it into action and then sharing it, and so we make a lot of YouTube videos as well. So if anybody is interested, I can always direct you to so many links. These stories of change are coming from Baptung Primary School in Phuntsho, Gangla Khema, Dangling, Ragitung. Oh my God, I would not even know about these schools if I hadn't actually visited them as the country partner. And there's such a spirit of collaboration. It's no longer about competition. And how can you compete? You know, you're here in Thimphu with all the facilities. How can you compete with a fellow school in a rural community? So when you go, there is so much of conviviality. They receive you with their open arms, and then they will lay out their best, you know, whatever they have to offer. And then we go also, you know, with this desire that, oh, we will share our best practices with them, and we will, you know, and we would take shoes and all kinds of things. But again, you know, when you think that you're giving somebody, it is so interesting that it comes back to you manifold. Because you can give things to them, but what our children from Thimphu learned, the biggest lessons for them was to cultivate an attitude of gratitude. And this gratitude, you don't know in this generation of entitled young Gen Z or Gen Y or whatever you call them, that it's always about, you know, you're never enough. But suddenly they go and they see their fellow students in these remote schools learning the same textbooks and everything, but my goodness, the level playing field is so different. Some don't have shoes on their feet, and they have so many they can't even count them. And that, I think, you know, I think our experiences used to be very, very emotional. It was an emotional learning journey.
So that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. FITS seem to take education totally sort of away from the intellect-based, the cognitive learning educational system. Now, of course, there are things like gratitude that you have to learn as a young person, but then the overall education is geared towards developing the competency of a child.
Yes.
So when we place so much importance on the emotions and the feelings, is that going to really help develop the child as a capable, productive, responsible citizen? How do we look at this dichotomy of the head and the heart? Should emotions take over the thoughts, or the intellect and the emotions have? How does it work in FITS?
I think because, you know, empathy plays such a big role. Now let's imagine the future, and let's imagine students who are coming out as graduates from schools, you know. But and then they become leaders. what practice have they had in making sound policy decisions if they do not know what the situations are in places that are far removed from where they are? So I feel like the heart must precede the head, and more in this particular time in our lives, as we can see, so many kids are dropping out of school. Even those that are in schools are struggling. So I feel that social and emotional learning skills are just as important as cognitive ones, if not more. And I think that at the end you'll get far more value for all those competencies, because imagine somebody with all the brains but doesn't know how to feel, doesn't have that awareness of how his neighbor is doing. I think then in that case, what good is all that intellectual thing that, you might just create a bomb and blow up, the world. So I feel that social and emotional learning skills are what we need to really infuse our schools with. And I feel like the intellectual part will actually automatically follow. Because if you understand why you're doing what you're doing, then I think it should follow suit in Omela.
But the socio-emotional part of our upbringing has to also happen at home, right?
Exactly.
It home plays a major role in
Goes
that.
without saying.
Whereas the school system perhaps has to provide a much more conducive environment for the cognitive development.
Yes. But okay, I mean, I have to say that even though we are obsessed with cognitive learning, we aren't faring so well there now. And why aren't we doing that? I mean, in 2015, I believe, we had a PISA D tests were conducted across many schools, 15-year-olds, and the results were not very encouraging. What the results showed was that we are more on breadth than in depth. And also we are not able to analyze very well. Our analytical thinking skills are not that great. And we have trouble applying them in the real world context. So what we're doing basically is we are saying that
Kids would do better in PISA and STEM and...
I mean, I wouldn't say that, but I feel like we need to give more space to also bring these into the school day. Right now, it's like, imagine 7-hour days. I may be a school principal and I may be very strict at school, but right now my children are doing exams and I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for them because it's like, oh, if I fail, and so worried, and 7-hour days in the school, and then we expect them to be like not fidgeting and being aligned to the teacher all the time. I think this is the factory model type of standardized education that is, I think now we have to move forward. And that's why things like design for change, I find I have very little time to do design for change. Last Sunday, I had an online training program with Design for Change club coordinators, mostly novice teachers who are so idealistic and who want to bring these change into their schools. And there were about 18 of them, some in Mungar, some in Chongsa, some in Pemagatsel, some in Tsirang, Samtsi, and the network was not very good, but oh my God, what a heartfelt, connected workshop we had, and it was just so amazing. And for me, when I do that with young novice teachers like that, it just gives me a lot of hope that there's so much good happening in our schools, but sometimes we just get a little bit overwhelmed with too much on our plate, and so we are not able to sometimes focus on what really matters. And what really matters today is to look at the children in a new light in the 21st century. I just told you, I grew up at a time when there was no indoor plumbing. Today, these kids are growing up in a whole different environment. I better understand how they're feeling and how they're thinking if I'm to do right by them. So I don't know if I've answered your question, Doctor.
So you have. I mean,
I've just been-
I'm also with you in many ways that I think there is already a widespread awareness among leading education is that the current system, the
Yes.
factory model, is no longer working, and we need to have a much more holistic approach to it. But then here we have a system that is still very much focused on cognitive learning and
Yes.
academic excellence.
Yes.
And when you bring in something like FITS, where you give plenty of room for socio-emotional learning and
Yes.
other activities.
And
at the
critical
same-
thinking.
Yeah, a critical thinking. But at the same time, you are also assessed based on the mainstream, the existent
Yes.
yardstick.
Yes.
And I was at your school watching a play, and at that event, you were also given 2 certificates for having a school in the top 10 last year. And then also another certificate for very speedy improvement.
Yes.
But how do you manage to maintain both? You have design for change, but at the same time you have to go with the Minister of Education's yardstick of measuring what is a successful education.
Yes.
How do you manage to combine the two? Or do you have to compromise?
Of course, it would be good if we had more time to be able to indulge in all of these other types of activities that really teach a child to grow more holistically, I would imagine. But I wouldn't say that the ranking is done solely on cognitive performance or competency base. There are 3 parameters by which they monitor and evaluate. The academic part, which the Big C, I don't know if you're all familiar with the Big C, right? The Board of Exams. They conduct, that is solely performance based. But there's also other 2 parameters which are called enabling practices, which look at how are you working to improve your school through professional development, and do you have enough toilets in your school, and the infrastructure. So there are that parameter as well. And then there's the other one, which is the GNH scorecard, which is what is the psychosocial learning environment in the school, and what kind of community related work are you doing. So these are GNH related, and these are actually evaluated by the self. And the ranking, to my knowledge and understanding when it first came about, was that they're not really doing it to compare schools, but more to be able to identify which schools are struggling and which ones are also thriving, and what would be the tenets of such a school that the ones that are struggling could imbibe and emulate and also grow. But how society works, you have some kind of a ranking, and then the society's view is all about that's a good school and that's a bad school. And then those who don't quite feature, I suppose there's a little bit of a bad vibe. But all in all, my personal take on it is that there should not be competition, because like I said, there's no level playing field. If it's going to come out like that, then it becomes kind of a high stakes situation, and in which case then the purpose kind of gets defeated, I feel. So for me, I like to look at collaboration. Now, if I'm working with 237 schools, I'm not competing with them. I would like to see how we can help each other.
So if you want to reform the school, if you take the ideal scenario, what would you like to see in a 7 to 8 hour day of a child in a school? What would you change most from the current situation?
I would say that maybe, so many of our school leaders have been trained for many years and have long years of experience. I think it's time to trust them a little bit, so that, if, at the headquarters level, let's say, you could establish broad framework, of standards that must be met. But beyond that, give us a little bit of autonomy to be able to follow our heart to do right. That when you see somebody struggling in the class, that you are also not acting out of fear because you have to deliver, you have to do well on this exam. So sometimes there's a ripple effect of a sense of fear, and that's, you cannot be creative when your amygdala is sort of, overacting. So I think that neocortex, for it to open up, I mean, I'm working with such wonderful colleagues, women and men equally, and I think we can be trusted to do a little bit better than we are currently.
So suppose you're given that full autonomy.
Yes. What would I do?
What would the child go through in 7 hours in your school?
I think, you know what? First, I would have a meeting with everybody, all the stakeholders, and certainly the children should be a part of it, and the parents, and all the teachers. And then we can co-create together. Then the principal should not be the dictator there again, then it's the same old story. So I feel like, if you want compliance and if you want people to collaborate and cooperate, you cannot dictate. And I get tired dictating as a school leader. And sometimes you're made to do that. But, so what would I want is first, a co-creation, and I think we can also have at various levels, these brainstorming sessions, people who, anybody in this society coming together, what kind of a scenario could we imagine? If you're feeling this problem, you can do our FIDs for the adults, feel, imagine, do, and then we'll share. And I think Bhutan is in such a pivotal position because already the world is looking up to us as a leader in so many ways. The way we have protected our environment, the pristine, the fresh air that you get to breathe every morning, all of this is going to be a rare commodity very soon on this earth. Then I look at somebody like Greta Thunberg, and I look at her. And even though our children may not have that kind of intelligence, to be able to have that kind of intelligence to look at, the fact that we may not have a future, at least, I think these are the things that should now teach us that let's learn about climate change even more, but not learn it in the classrooms, but how does it impact our everyday actions in our home, and the parents, everybody is involved. And in a small country like Bhutan, which is already not so overrun with plastic, but soon happening, we could nip it in the bud much sooner. I think it's a missed opportunity, there's so much. We should be happy to go to school every day, And I think that would be the biggest indicator that we are doing the right thing. When kids are happy to come to school, not dropping out and staying home.
That would probably, according to some educationist theory, take us back to hunter-gatherer days when work and play were one and the same, and children grew up treating work as play. I don't know if our current situation would really attract children to come to schools to really see it as a play, with all the digital distraction, for instance.
Well, that's in our hands.
Yeah.
That's in our hands.
I would have also liked to ask you about how much we can involve the children in decision-making processes, especially in recent days we have been discussing about age of consent. I think there's a lot of questions we need to ask about how much can children decide and determine for their future in the best way. But we've run out of time. My final question for you before we turn to the audience is, what, for you personally, keeps you sort of active, sharp, on top of things when you're stressed, when you have to work with so many problems and challenges? Do you have any tips or techniques, like meditation or prayers or walks or books that you read that others can also emulate?
Oh, definitely, the mindfulness is an integral part of GNH education, and we've been doing it for a good 10 years. How well we are doing is a whole different story, of course, but it's so wonderful that I feel every morning we start with meditation in our school, and we don't do it for long periods of time, and it becomes yet another thing to do, and it should never be like that, because the mindfulness, I feel, is a really, really handy tool to have when you are bombarded with so many things, and you cannot filter and you cannot think straight, and it happens to the best of us as adults as well. So I actually run a meditation group every Wednesday, and I see one of our participants who happens to be here. But
In your school?
yes, it's called the Awaken School, Awaken Circle, and it was started some 20 years by somebody in Santa Clara in California, and now it's spread across the world. And again, as luck would have it, I have the privilege of hosting it at my school. And of course, that's my disconnect from, because I live on campus, by the way, with all these teenagers. And so it's my little disconnect, and then we just share silence, and then we read a little reading, and then we share whatever comes up for us on that reading. But also another thing is that I feel like I have to be constantly in a state of learning, because, I come from a different generation, and no matter what kind of training and experience I've had, I'm challenged every day, because of the rapidly changing society that we live in, that I need to know who we are working with every single day. So I have a friend in the YouTube, because you can have just right there in your living room, Sir Ken Robinson, Dr. Dan Siegel, all of these wonderful people who are telling us, who are doing research and telling us that this is not how children learn, this is not how they are naturally inclined to learn. So, so we try, and all these little ways in which to make, few changes in the way we approach, so that we are aligned with the children. So yes,
so meditation, mindfulness.
And
any question from the audience?
So I would just like to ask you, I've been here 3 months, it's not very long, but from what I've seen, people in Bhutan are very often highly literate, with a very good understanding of the written speech, but fairly low on practical application.
Very low
on practical application. So it seems to me that a little bit of practical education in the education system would be really beneficial. I'm not sure what it's like in the country areas, because I haven't had enough experience there, but this is really Timpu and the surrounds. I'd just like your comments on that, please.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm saying. If you're cooped up indoors for 7-hour days, then obviously, all you're doing is looking at theory-based work, and we have not much in terms of practical experimentation and stuff like that. And I think that's where things like Design for Change allows us, really, when you are faced with a problem and you're able to imagine solutions, then there's a lot of conversation happening, there's a lot of brainstorming, this idea could work, this idea could not work, all of these type of things. So you're engaged, you're much more engaged, but you want to be cognitively competent, but the way we are doing it, I suppose, is not really helping us get there. So, this is exactly, so you're proving what I just said earlier, that that's the state that we find ourselves in.
I came to listen to you talk, and it's wonderful. And I came to listen because I was wondering what our next generation students are going to get into. And it reminded me when you said factory production, and I remember that in the 70s or late 70s, there was a song called Another Brick on the Wall by Pink Floyd. So if you all can remember that, that is what we are producing right now. And during my children's time, there was a lot of changes in syllabus and method of teaching, from the teaching we learned, cognitive learning, then to need, then back to something else, then now I don't know what is happening. So Design to Change, I think it looks very promising. But I think Dr. Phuntsho asked you frequently, saying that how would you change?
How would I change?
Change it into how would you feel to change it, and how would you change it?
Yes.
That is what I would like to do, because I think the next generation of the students we don't want another brick on the wall. Thank you.
Yes, and that's why, when I talked about FIDS for kids, the FIDS process is what we could apply. See, now, if I say, this is how I want, I become just another one to dictate, imposing my will. Whereas when you do this feel, imagine, do, share, and then let's say all these thinkers, we come together, and then you feel, what are the things that are going wrong here? What are the things that are not going right? And what is the preferred scenario that you see? You're a parent, you're a teacher, you could be a potential parent, all of these things. So that's why I say FITS for kids, because the FITS process, because then it's not one person dictating it anymore. It's the society co-creating something. But now you have a template to do it. But of course, since you're probing me to say, I feel like there should be a little bit of a transformation, not just tweaking here and there, a little workshop here, a little workshop there. We keep doing, we get very, very energized when it happens, and we'll do it for a few months, and then it's forgotten. I don't know whether that's been anybody's experience, but that's been my experience. It doesn't last, because you're not shifting the whole system. You're just tweaking here and there, and it makes a very, very small dent. But I do believe that what we need now is every teacher should have counseling skills. Today, it's not that great teacher who prepares a beautiful lesson plan, but doesn't even see what the state of the student is. I've covered my syllabus, put a check, but then how much has the child learned? Was the child even there? You're there, but you're not there. So I think that's what, we need to also be more socially and emotionally intelligent about these things. That means we are not anymore correcting their math and their grammar, but we are looking at what's going on inside their head. And if we don't do that, then no amount of, all the hours that you spend is going to be of value, and this is how I...
But is it something like this also taught by other educational systems? I mean, we don't have to rely on FITS just to...
No. I mean, that FITS is...
understand the students.
By the way, FITS is not the panacea. It's just one program we do. And this program, and if I can just be a little bit more clear, maybe I did not make it very clear. So the feel, imagine, do, share is like, how do you start in a school? Is like you could have a small club. You could have a club of 15 kids. And then you create the safe space where the teacher or the coordinator is the facilitator. And then says, okay, this is a very safe space. What are you not feeling happy about here? What is it that bothers you? It can be something so simple as too much homework the teacher's giving, that's like really a drag for me to be in school. Or it could be like somebody feeling pained by somebody else getting hurt. Or it could be some cruelty to animals that a kid sees on his way to school. But this is where the beginnings of change can happen. That the status quo doesn't have to be so, and that you don't have to wait to be an adult to make the change. Because hello, at the end, adults are also struggling. So if you can have that practice that I have the power to make the change right now, and I can make my world a little bit better than it was yesterday. This is what gives them the power and the confidence to be able to make positive changes. And so then imagine is that preferred scenario. So if you have 15 kids, the process, if you have 15 kids, you'd have each one ask, what are you bothered by? And if somebody doesn't want to say anything also, that's fine. And if somebody says something really silly also, what we try to tell the children is, you have to respect everybody's problem. And that's how you go. And then you put all of it, and then through blind voting, we say, of course, all of these problems are important, but let's focus on one that is very pressing, that we can all collectively solve together. And so then they will zoom in on one problem, for instance. So let's say bullying emerges as the one that everybody feels is the most pressing. And then the next stage is imagine. So again, the teachers on the board, as each one will say, we could do this, how about we did this, so do you see that critical thinking, creative thinking, all kinds of ideas are being generated, and generated in such a realistic way, because there's a real problem. It's not a pretend problem, because when we do math, it's already, imagine you're going from here to there, whatever. This is a real situation that they've brought up. So the children have to drive the change. So then after them, then they can have a whole host of solutions, but you look at the one that is most doable, and then you go out and do it in the do stage. And it's not working, come back to the drawing board, let's try the next one. And I think this is a process that policymakers should also be following, I would imagine. This is not working. And sometimes you decided on your own, and then so much money has been wasted, and it didn't work. So I think this is like really critical thinking, creative, problem solving, decision making, everything is there.
Madam, I just wanted to draw two scenarios where 30 years before you worked as a teacher in remote Pakistan, and today you are leading a renowned school in the capital city. I have two questions. 30 years before, you might have faced a diverse group of students in remote Pakistan, but there's a common, if you consider their parents, there's a common profession there of farmers.
Yes.
So today you have, in the capital city, if you have 200 or 300 students in your school, you might be having 300 parents with diverse background, professional backgrounds, I mean. So my two quick questions are, how you as an ELC principal today, how you engage and involve the urban parents? There's so much diverse professional backgrounds in your school. And as a collaborator in the remote schools in Pemagas or somewhere in Samuzonga, how you are advising your fellow teachers there to take on board those rural parents, I mean, with a common farming background.
Thank you so much, but I think you're giving me more power than I actually have now. I mean, I'm barely struggling to, communicate with my own parents, very busy parents. But I think the idea is this, with my own parents, we have actually a program called Pro-H4. That's our citizenship program. Now we talked about Design for Change, but Project Helping Hands for Health and Happiness was born out of, when Bhutan became a democracy. So how do we bring about citizenship education in our school was really that, okay, there are many issues happening around. And one of the things that we took up as our cause was the kidney failure. So Bhutan Kidney Foundation became our partner. And so for the past 7 years, through this partnership, the parent body, the student body, the teachers, all of us come together and we have a carnival where we invite the kidney patients even and we raise funds for them. But the fundraising is so interesting, the way the fundraising happens. It's not like, something that will not be sustainable, always asking them for money, as it is you're a private school, you have to pay fees and now you want to collect this. No, it's nothing like that. We have this carnival whereby it's a very, very mindful kind of a carnival. I mean, there's food, there's drinks, there's games and things. Everybody comes there to have fun. It's like your fete or your mela or whatever. But what we're selling is like repurposed products. We make cushions out of waste. We make pencil cases, and Clean Bhutan is here, so the host of things that you do to repurpose waste, we sell them. The parents come, everybody comes in a spirit of collaboration and fun, and at the end we're able to raise money that one couldn't imagine. And I don't want to say it, but just to give you a case in point, is like last year we were able to donate an eco van to the Bhutan Kidney Foundation. As we culminated years of just contributing 50,000, 1 lakh, 1,20,000, whatever came out of it. But last year we were able to do that. And that came because we felt like these kidney patients were not only suffering from a disease, but also they were financially deprived. And so our kids actually go to visit these students, these patients in the patient's guest house, and that's when empathy really comes. And so we're able to raise money, we're able to garner the parent support. I feel that kind of community support is very, very important. And of course, Design for Change right now, I'm just working with the clubs, with the club coordinator. They will do their Design for Change process, and maybe they will come up with some kind of a problem. Okay, can I give one more example?
Yes,
one example, Ragitung Primary School, that was our first partner school. And they became, and interesting is out of this Design for Change partnership, when the principal actually called me and said, Madam, I want to do DFC in my school, but I really don't know what it's all about. And then, you know what, we said we'll come there during our Sechu holiday. So we took our DFC club students there for 2 days, and we had a partnership with them, and then they are now our DFC partner. So what was their story of change? And this school was only established in 2011, can you imagine that in Chuka? And every day what they felt bothered was the pathway to the school was very steep. So every day parents are worried, every day students are worried that they'll fall off. And then so the design for change problem that they all shared was safety. And then they imagine, you know how we adults think, where's the budget? There's no budget for a fence. But these kids, so imagine means they're putting all their critical thinking skills and creativity at work. How about we invite our parents? Our parents are all farmers, they're very handy with their knives, and then there's bamboos all over. In one day, they built a 150-meter long fence. And that's a powerful story of change where the whole community comes together and nobody's complaining because it's your children, and you know, so you don't have to go and write a letter to the district education officer and say, oh, these children are complaining about safety now, can you release some budget? And of course the answer would be no budget. But here you don't need budget. So it's about resourcefulness.
Good evening. As somebody rightly said, if I ask question, I may be full for 5 minutes, and if I don't, I may remain full for forever. So taking that stand, I would like to thank Madam for sharing your profound thoughts and express your vast experience on education system, and particularly taking us back. I remember when I was in class 4, a poem reciting poem on, by James Ravis, if pigs could fly, I'll fly a pig, something like that. And that was 30 years ago in common primary school, and it was you, madam, for and for that matter, I would like to take this platform to opportunity to thank you for your those teachings. And my question would be, what were some of the challenges that you faced, especially in common primary school? I may be selfish, but for that matter, it will help us. And how would you relate your experience of those days and today, and what exactly you would like to really, give us furthermore in terms of learning, and especially like as we have been listening to you, we learn so much of your good deeds and your actions that you have been doing today. What could be your challenges
yes.
that you actually face in those?
So thank you, and so happy to see you here. When I was in Kamlung Primary School, I had just barely begun my career as a teacher, and I was also starting a family. I remember my 30-year-old daughter, who happens to be in the audience, so 30 years exactly. I think the challenges, it was a nice remote school out there, and I think in those days I was learning to be a good teacher, and I don't remember too much of a challenge. I remember happy days actually. But one incident I will tell you, which I keep telling my students at the high school also. The kids were taught English in such a rote way that when I first came to Kamlung Primary, and I would be walking from my home to the school and then back, and then along the way I would always meet students, and they wanted to speak English, but you are different, but some of these kids were really struggling. So they were taught English, but they didn't know what they were saying. So like I would be walking, and then I think they wanted to greet me. But you know what they used to say? May I come in, sir? May I come in, sir? And sir, and may I come in? Because they were like conditioned to, do you remember? They were conditioned to go, to ask for permission. And that's what my students do every time. And I say, why do you have to ask for permission when you're expected to be in the class? So that's when I shared this. But So now I would like to say that I had a happy days there. I was just starting my family, and and I had been, let go of being, in the planning commission, and so I was where I wanted to be. So I have happy memories now.
I think there are still quite a lot of young children in remote schools who would address anyone who comes as sir. I've been to some schools like that myself.
Well, through my experience as a teacher and educator, I would like to share a few things, and probably I would like to listen to your perspective as well. With 60% of the education curriculum content being very universal for Bhutan, one of the challenges we see today is not having enough education, Bhutanized education for our own people. So, in a way, we could say our education system is very good in producing universal citizens, but probably not so good in producing Bhutanized citizens. So, what would be your perspective?
Thank you so much for that question, love. And maybe I was never getting to the point, but the preferred scenario is not kids sitting in the classroom and being all theoretical, but like agriculture, for instance. So when in fact doctor said hunter-gatherer, I feel like that is not such a bad thing, even if you're learning. Yes, like you're learning the skills of survival. And so I would like to see us like thrive in agriculture. Kids are doing agriculture, growing food, feeling self-sufficient. And not everybody has to do agriculture, because there are some schools that are situated in the middle of the city. But like maybe some can go into sports, some can go into, permaculture, you name it, the sky's the limit. And at the end of the day, don't we want a diversified kind of a society with divergent kind of skills, rather than a one-size-fits-all, everybody aiming for the same job, not getting it? And if we can be self-reliant and also teach dignity of labor, but you can cut hair, but you can cut the best damn hair, and everybody is like looking for you. And I think that's what we need to be able to make people competent in anything, and have that dignity of labor, and because it's not labor anymore, it's something that is coming out of your passion. And so I think there's a place for, and we're such a small society, I don't know why we actually have problems with employment. Maybe it goes back to us not producing employable, or there's a mismatch. So there really needs to be a rethink in how we're going. Take a back step. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we can start by taking a back step. My last question to you is, we offer you 2 books.
Oh, yes.
You just mentioned about how human intelligence is very diverse. Our reading habits are also diverse. What 2 books did you choose, and why?
Yes, love. So I chose by the same author, love, and she has 5 New York Times bestsellers, love. Daring Greatly and The Gifts of Imperfection. And Daring Greatly and The Gifts of Imperfection, and they're both authored by a professor and a psychologist and a researcher named Brené Brown. And as I told you, the YouTube has become such a close friend of mine. I feel she's a good friend of mine, because it's really a labor of love. All the books that she's come up with is really tackling the issues of how children are feeling in the classroom, how they're engaging with each other. And I think it also speaks to us, the adults, And we did talk about perfection, but the gifts of imperfection, I think, really is just embracing every child, because they have something to offer, and it may seem like imperfection, but yeah.
So these are books on education and
yes, and for anybody, anybody just about. But certainly it would be a good guide for teachers.
Yes. So thank you very much for joining us and talking to us. I normally end the session with a Buddhist quote, and I think since today's theme is on education and change, I think Vasubandhu's quote that I chose today is very appropriate, particularly for what you have argued for, both learning and implementation, or learning through doing. Vasubandhu, who is a 4th century Indian philosopher, scholar, so learned that he was called the second Buddha, says, "Sulne tedang samnembe gombalane raptu jor." With discipline, one must engage in learning, reflection, and practice.
Yes.
So with that,
So
I'd like to
nice.
close the session. Thank you all for coming, and see you next time.
Thank you.